We at Engineering Systems would like to thank you for choosing AccuSQL. AccuSQL is the most popular software at colleges and universities nationwide and abroad for advanced time and attendance tracking. We're proud of our AccuSQL software, and we know it'll be a great addition to your center. In this video, I'll show you how to install AccuSQL 12 and then transfer a database over to SQL Server and finally connect to it. Okay, so I popped in the key here, and depending on which operating system, it'll either auto-run the AccuSQL.exe or you can launch it. This will start the program installer, so I'll go ahead and double-click on that. Okay, and then I'm going to pick AccuSQL here. Oh, and by the way, a little license agreement will appear. You can review that. And I'll click on AccuSQL. And the second link here is Install AccuSQL. That'll open the Windows installer. Okay, and I'll click Next. And Next again. And again, the license agreement. I'll accept that and click Next. Here you can put in your information. And I recommend installing for anyone who uses a computer, all users. Next. This is the default installation folder. C program files could be x86 depending AccuSQL 12. You can change that, but I'll keep the default. Click Next. And I recommend a typical installation. This will install users' manuals and some various other items. So go with typical. Click Next. And you can review your settings and then click Install. And it'll take a few minutes to install. Now while we're waiting, if you want other clients to use AccuSQL, well, you'd have to install the software in each of the clients. I'm going to transfer the database using this computer. I only need to do that once, and then you would install AccuSQL on the clients and then point them to the SQL Server database. And this, by the way, is a laptop that I'm using, and I'll be connecting to another server that is housing SQL Server. This is a rather slow laptop. Okay, so once the installer is complete, you can just click Finish, and then back on the product installer here, I'll go ahead and exit that. And as you can see, I have an icon on the desktop, AccuSQL 12. I could launch it from there. Also in my Programs folder, I have AccuSQL 12, which includes launching the application, and then I have a quick start, reference manual, and a what's new in version 12 manual. Okay. So I'll go ahead and open up AccuSQL 12 from the desktop. The first time I open it, it's going to copy some files into its public folder just so it'll open, and then ultimately I need to transfer the database. Also, it's going to open in native mode using a tutoring sample database. Okay? Now, ultimately, you'll be transferring a blank database will be the one you'll start building. Okay, so I'll log in the first time with the default admin is 9 ones. So 1 9 times, press enter, and the password is all caps, NEW, new. And it'll say I'm using the default ID and password. It's recommended you change those. But now I'm in AccuSQL 12, and you can see down here at the bottom it says I am not connected to a SQL Server database. Well, right, because I haven't transferred one. So that's the next step. I'm going to go to Expanded View, and then Expand Database, and click on Transfer Database to SQL Server. Okay, now here I'm pointing to a tutoring sample database, which is fine. That's the one I'll transfer. But ultimately, I would go in here and pick the blank AccuData database. Once I transfer that one, that's the one you would begin to build for your college. Okay. Now I'll put in my SQL Server information. It's my Support 1 server, and I'm going to use SQL Server authentication. You need SA credentials in order to do this process. And now I can name the database what I'd like. I'll call it ESI 12. I don't need an owner. Typically you would use the native client. We'll talk about this in a minute, but I would recommend that. You can always test your connection to see which one it likes. So I'm happy with SQL Native Client. Also, at the time that I create this database or transfer it, I can create a DBO account, a public account at that time. Now I recommend if you want to use a DBO account, you would go ahead and do that now, because we do different kind of grant permissions and various things through the code. That's hard to recreate back in SQL Server. So I'll go ahead and create that DBO account. And now I'll click Transfer Data. And this is going to create the database called ESI_12 out on my Support 1 SQL Server, and it's going to drop all of the data from my tutoring sample database locally here into SQL Server. I have around 5,000 students or so in my sample database, so it's a little bit longer than it would be if I was doing the blank database. But as you can see, it's putting the data into the tables now in SQL Server. Okay, so once that's done, then I can just click OK here and close my transfer window. The next step, and I don't have to exit AccuSQL to do this, but I can then point to my newly transferred SQL Server database. I do that by going to Database Location, and I want to pick SQL Server mode now. I'll click Next, and I get to enter the same information again. My SQL Server, my authentication. Now I just created that DBO account, so I could use that one. And then I click my drop down to see what databases are available to me. Now I have several out there, but I did ESI_12 right here. And I can test that and then save it. Now once I save, it says I need to exit the program and re-enter it for changes to take effect. So when I do that and re-enter, I'll be back connected to my ESI12 database in SQL Server. Now something else I want to mention is this application shared path. That's used for several different reasons. What that would be is you could create a public share out on the server or wherever you want, and then point the clients to that shared database. And that's used for things like software updates. The way that works is when you download an update on a computer, it drops it out in that shared folder in another folder called updates. Then when any other client that is pointing to that same shared path opens AccuSQL, well, it checks to see if there's any newer files in its shared update folder, and if it finds them, it'll copy them back over before it opens. It's also used for shared reports, if you do customized reports and share them, and also for photos. So if you upload student or tutor photos, you'd want to have a public share out there and put all your photos out there. Okay. It's up to you whether you create that application shared path or not. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close this form, and it said to exit and re-enter. So I'll now exit the program, and then when I reopen it, I should be in SQL Server mode pointed to my ESI 12 database. Okay, so I'll reopen the program. And from this point on, this is exactly what you do on the clients. After you've installed the software, it would open up. Remember, it would be in native mode. But I'll log in with my ones and my all caps new. And then I would go to my database location. Now, if this was a brand new install on a client, well, you'd switch from native to SQL Server, click Next, and then you would put in your server name, your authentication, your DBO if you'd created that at the time, and pick your database, and then you can save. Now you exit and then reopen the client, and it'll be pointing now to that SQL Server database. Okay? One other tip that I'd like to mention is if you try to test a connection here, you're installing the client, and it says something like, oh, provider cannot be found, or OLE dispatch error. Okay, what that means is we don't have the SQL native driver connectivity client installed. And I can go right to my install folder for AccuSQL, which in this case is C program files AccuSQL 12. And in that folder, I have another subfolder called SQL drivers. Okay, and that's right here. Okay. Now that has two different flavors. I have a 32-bit and a 64-bit flavor, and I can go find out on my operating system what I'm using. I believe this one's 32-bit. And indeed it is. So if I was seeing that driver cannot be found or another dispatch error, then I would install the 32-bit SQLN CLI, which is the driver for SQL Server. Here's the 64-bit flavor. Okay, and then I could go back and test my connection to make sure I get it test succeeded successfully. Okay. Okay, so that's it. Thank you.